So yeah, thanks guys for coming to the meeting. Yeah, and thanks for giving us the chance to talk to you. So I'm sure all of us here agree that it's pretty important to help others. We value the lives of other people and we care about their well-being. But when we care so much, it can be really overwhelming to see so many pressing problems in the world. To list just a few of these, 1 in 10 people live in extreme poverty. 6 million, sorry, slides being, oh, there we go. 6 million children die yearly of easily preventable diseases. Climate change is set to wreak havoc on the environment and the economy. 1/3 of women have suffered from sexual or physical violence. Over 3,000 nuclear warheads are sitting around the world ready to launch. Bacteria are becoming antibiotic resistant. Our food systems cause suffering to hundreds of billions of animals. I could go on. And I'm sure that each of you have a particular issue that you care a lot about. In the face of so many problems, it can really feel like we can't make much of a difference. But fortunately, we can if we have the right mindset. We have an amazing opportunity to significantly improve the world with the resources we have, provided that we are able to use those resources effectively. The way most people think about charity could be drastically improved. Only about 1/3 of people do any research before giving, and about 3% of people actually give based on the relative performance of those charities. That's probably because there's a common assumption that a really good charity might only do a little bit better than an average charity. But it turns out that the difference can actually be a lot more dramatic. The best charities can be at least 10 times better than a typical charity within the same area, or hundreds of times better than a poor performing charity. Some charities actually actively harm the people that they're trying to help. These huge differences don't tend to come from trivial things like administrative costs. Instead, they almost always come from the types of interventions that the charities are pursuing. So to make this a bit more concrete, let's take a look at some of the numbers that the World Bank has provided on interventions related to waterborne illnesses. So sanitation is really important. It's not something that most people think about very much, but waterborne illnesses kill more than 3 million people each year, and those are mostly children. So to illustrate this, let's say that one heart, or each heart on this slide, represents 1 year of healthy life. So let's see how many years of healthy life different water-related interventions get us for 15,000 Rand. If we provide piped water and flushing toilets, that gives us around 6 months of healthy life. Some of that benefit comes from preventing illness and some comes from preventing deaths. 15,000 Rand for 6 months of healthy life seems like a pretty good deal. But it turns out that giving people chlorine to disinfect their water is about 10 times more effective than that. It doesn't stop there either. Giving sick children zinc with electrolyte salts can result in an extra 33 years of healthy life for the same 15,000 Rand. Of course, waterborne illnesses aren't the only problems that we might want to address. What happens if we broaden our search to the treatment of any disease? So we'll pretty much find that the differences are even more incredible. It's estimated that we can get an extra 200 years of healthy life per 15,000 Rand spent changing to a particular treatment for severe malaria. Now, if we compare that to a place where many people would be willing to spend 15,000 Rand by getting a week of healthy life gained through new cancer drugs, we can see that the difference is absolutely monumental. Of course, funding sanitation programs and cancer drugs are both really important, and they're well worth spending money on. But evidently, not all charities are the same. There's an incredible opportunity to fund some interventions like malaria treatment, which could be hundreds of times more effective with the same amount of money spent. And it's critical that we act on those impactful opportunities because every single day, people's lives are on the line. So when we talk about numbers like years of a healthy life or the numbers of lives saved, it can be quite easy to get lost in these like big, crazy abstractions. So I like to think about it this way. When I think about someone that I love, I don't think about a statistic. I think about how rich their life is, their hopes, fears, quirks, things that make them absolutely unique. But then I remind myself that's exactly what the statistics represent. Each one of those little heart icons on the previous slide represents a year of human life, unlike anything else. They have a best friend. That person has a favorite song. They have plans, hopes, desires. That's what all those statistics represent. And that's why the numbers are really important. So now I'm going to hand over to Ahmed to talk about how we can go about finding really good causes to donate to that can save millions of lives.
Thank you, Jordan. Right, so this is now the difficult question, like how do we actually prioritize, right? And I think up until this point, many effective altruists would be in agreement, right? That, we need to kind of combine our heart and mind, right? So we have our heart representing sort of our emotional impulse. We want to do good. We want to save lives. We want to help people, be compassionate. But and effective altruists will add to that saying, no, we should combine that with our mind, right? So, we should make sure we actually maximizing the good that we can do, and that we actually are doing good, we're not doing harm. Because when you don't do research, a lot of the time you actually end up doing harm. So that's in effective altruism movement, there's that broad agreement that we want to combine our heart and mind. Where there's disagreement now is how exactly do we do that? Like, if we want to be effective in our altruism, in our doing good, what is good, right? That's a debate that's been going on for about 2,000 years, right? Like, what is ethics? What is good? And then how can we measure that good? How can we quantify it, right? What strategies are there? So what I'm going to present is basically just one sort of framework of doing this and a broad rules of thumb almost of how we can sort of look at how we can compare different causes. Jordan, you go to the next slide. So this one framework looks at causes that are big, tractable, and uncrowded. I'm going to explore these in a bit more detail. But again, this is just sort of one framework of trying to, and this is up for debate. Effective altruists themselves disagree on this. So firstly, big, affecting many lives and by a lot. Some people say affecting many people, and it must be serious as well. So the idea being, okay, you can have a cause, you can try and cure a very rare disease. But if for the same amount of money, you can save the lives of much more people, right? Then that might be more worthwhile. That would be a bigger cause, right? But also serious. So if you sort of, like they give an example of male baldness, right? That affects many people. And I think 2 billion rand or $2 billion a year are spent trying to treat and find cures for male baldness. So it affects many people, but it's not particularly serious. And that's more than is spent on both malaria and HIV and AIDS combined every year. So those causes affect many people and they are much more serious. So that's what we mean by big, affecting many people and by a lot. It causes a lot of suffering. And you go to the next slide. Second, tractable, right? So showing clear ways of measuring progress, of making progress that wouldn't have happened otherwise, right? So when you want to compare causes, we need some way of measuring it, right? And you'd actually be surprised about how much we can actually measure. Now, with some of the causes we just saw, you can use quality adjusted life years or years of healthy life. That's one way of measuring it, where you can use randomized control trials to try and say which causes are best. But even with unprecedented risks almost, you can use a lot of the tools they use in finance, right? So when it comes to using statistics and probability, and you'd be surprised at exactly how much you can measure. But that's one key criteria, that it must be tractable so that we can compare those causes. Next. And thirdly, uncrowded. What we find, like in many other cases, is that there are almost diminishing returns to doing good, right? So for example, if you eat a first slice of pie, right, it tastes really good. You can have another slice of pie and another slice, but it doesn't taste as good as the first one, right? So that's what they mean by diminishing returns. But same with doing good, we find that the causes that are less crowded, you can often do a lot more good by sort of picking the low-hanging fruit. So for example, you might get these causes that are really rare, and people are trying to solve this thing because it sounds interesting, but lots of people still have, for example, malaria. Those are sort of ongoing problems. And just because it's not as interesting or it's kind of boring, does not mean that, you know, we shouldn't be actually investing more time into it. And in fact, going into malaria has a lot larger returns to doing good, right? It's a lot easier to help people with malaria than it is with other causes if you're investing the same amount of money. So that's what I mean by generally the most effective causes are uncrowded and are neglected. And that's actually what sometimes makes effective altruism a bit controversial by its very nature, because the causes a lot of the time that they recommend, people aren't interested in. They aren't the common causes. They aren't the interesting ones, but they're the ones that are the most effective. Go next. So these are basically the three general rules of thumb, but again, it's just one framework, focusing on causes that are big, that are tractable, and that are uncrowded. And I think Zainab will show some examples of this.
Hello, everyone. Can you guys hear me? Awesome stuff. Assalamu alaikum. Good evening. My name is Zainab, and I'll be presenting the last part of the presentation and just taking over from what Jordan and Ahmed have already presented, showing now like just the practical examples in terms of what we can do with the information that they've already presented. What are these promising causes that are big, that are tractable, that are uncrowded, you know? Looking at different career options. So here are some areas that people in this community have found particularly promising. Jordan, you can go to the next slide. Health and development. So one promising area is global health and development. There are tens of millions of people whose lives could easily be improved by proven, inexpensive interventions. And this isn't cutting edge medicine. It's things like making sure kids get vaccinated and have the nutrients they need to avoid predictable health issues. I'm sure, as you know, right now, in terms of just like, we know in terms of our health system here, like in South Africa as well, how depending on which area you're in, people have different access to different healthcare systems. For the most part, people who have access to the private healthcare system will usually be able to have better healthcare services as compared to people within the public healthcare system. And it starts with just basic things like neonatal care. So before, while women are pregnant, while the fetus is still in their wombs, that sort of thing, in terms of tracking causes and contributing to causes that that deal with that, and then postnatal, of course, and early childhood development, etc. Next slide. So is animal welfare. About 60 billion farm animals are raised each year, and as much as, you know, when you think about animals, we think, you know, again, it can be controversial, and some people may consider that we should rather focus on human lives instead of animal welfare. But as we all know, they form part of a large system, and they've almost become part of our lives. Some of them are pets, and some of it even part of the food chain as well. But this is also another promising area, in particular factory farming and the ethics and the morals that is involved there. If you value the lives of animals, there's an astonishing amount of unnecessary suffering that we can prevent. Especially promising solutions include legal reform to ban certain farming practices and the development of animal product alternatives such as cell-based or plant-based meats. I'm sure you guys have seen just like the crazy videos that go around in terms of just that deeply unethical practices that are happening on farms, how animals are being treated and being ill-treated. So this is a very popular budding area within the effective altruism community as well, where there's a lot of potential, especially if you have any legal heads here, in terms of just looking at legal reform, oversight by government institutions or boards and that sort of thing, to practically regulate farms and farm workers and that sort of thing, like, you know, making sure that there's actually consequences if farmers continue to break or breach these rules. As we understand, human beings do. It's a messed up thing, but yeah, the law to an extent can also assist in that area. Next slide, Jordan. And then this is the people who are like into conspiracy theories, an exciting part. This is really interesting, but also affects different big parts, really, really exciting stuff. People who are interested in tech, for instance, or biological sciences, etc., nuclear, the whole nuclear area and climate change. There's a huge scope for that, and another promising area. It's a good opportunity for many different reasons to address the risks that threaten everyone on the planet. So this is really big because it can literally affect, all four can literally affect our, forget even like just like in terms of like future generations, it could literally even affect whether or not human beings will continue like our survival on this planet. If you look at, so things like pandemics, nuclear fallout are so big in scale. And they're important, even if it's hard to measure how much progress you can make. You can't really do a randomized controlled trial on policies to prevent nuclear wars because it's almost like, as I think was it Ahmed or Jordan mentioned this earlier, there's a whole lot of groups, organizations worldwide who are almost ready with like, you know, to just set it off depending on the climate and just like different political situations. It could literally go off and next thing, you know, as has been covered. So, but we still need people to work on these policies. People who are, for instance, in diplomacy, people within who advise governments, people even in terms of just general people, because these organizations are made of people, conscientization. In terms of extreme climate change, there's a lot of work that is being done in terms of just acknowledging and working towards the goal, like the United Nations Development, United Nations Development, Sustainable Development Goals, as was recently being highlighted recently. Countries have committed to a particular deadline, you know, by 2050, in where they have promised that they're going to try and reach a certain goal to ensure that they reduce their greenhouse emissions, etc., in terms of implement policies that regulate commercial and industrial the industrial sectors of their countries to reduce their carbon footprint, etc. When it comes to new technologies, whether it's AI and so forth, this is again another huge, sometimes even controversial sector where people are really like, you know, it can grow, and as we all know, technology literally develops so quickly, you could never measure it, and we have to plan for that, where it could go in terms of the moral ethics of it. We're talking about self-driving cars, talking about robots taking over people's jobs, etc. All of that needs to be regulated to ensure that abuse does not happen. And these are all, again, areas for potential in terms of people, as you think of the career options, to think as an effective altruist, what is the most effective way in which I could impact change in terms of literally you're thinking of saving humanity. These are all very, very promising opportunities. Next slide. Yeah, and more. And these are just, like I mentioned, these are very promising opportunities, and there are many more that people in our community are dominating to, that they're researching and are currently working on. Plus, we're constantly on the lookout for more promising careers. So if you're really interested, or you would something just like caught you while in this entire presentation, please, I'm sure we will be circulating an email, but you can just even go onto your Google, just look up 80,000 hours. Even on YouTube, there's videos about this. There's books about giving what we can, effective altruism. Just go onto the website of 80,000 hours, and there's a lot of information, all these different things. And it's really just up to you to go in, to dive in, and yeah, I'm sure Ahmed and Jordan will go get into this, but yeah, thank you for your time.